I am, as they say in the vernacular, checking your levels.
Whoa.
It's not as much fun as getting your cuticles pushed back.
I don't guess so. Well, make sure you check
your levels.
Well, make sure you air, water, and oil.
What? Oh, you've been reading again, haven't you?
Antifreeze. Antifreeze, all that stuff. I know. By the way, do you know how to make antifreeze?
No. How do you make antifreeze?
Steal her underwear.
It's going to be another one of those shows.
That's so old. That joke is so old. I got that one when I was a small boy. Very old.
Roger Dykes Just Sayin is back on the podcast, everybody. And of course, by now, he's Roger. And we had our now becoming, I guess, typical before the podcast telephone meeting, where you and I lay out the integral parts of the upcoming, sometimes a bit complicated podcast. You want me do I need to call you back and we start all over?
Whatever you think.
Oh, man. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is time once again to kick off the show. Roger Dykes Just Sayin. Hello, I'm Michael Sean, and welcome to Roger Dykes Just Sayin. Roger Dykes is a teacher and counselor with a master's degree in family counseling from Texas Tech University. He is the owner of UV Blake Records and has written a book titled Non-Persons Rolling in a Normal World. And there's a few more things. Roger was born with cerebral palsy. Now a quadriplegic, he has been confined most of his life to a wheelchair. And for a while, even enjoying a career as a stand-up or sit-down comedian and after-dinner speaker. Disabled? Yes, but you forget about that pretty quickly because Roger thrives. So here is Roger Dykes. So when we come out of the intro, Roger, you want to take it and run with it, and I'll just hold on to the saddle horn and try to keep up?
Do I have to run, or can I just roll along? Good morning. How are you doing? Glad you're back with us on the podcast.
Oh, good morning, Roger. It's good to be here.
I'm glad you're here. Without you, our audience doesn't realize it, but without you, I would be nothing.
Oh, shh. I'm going to have to edit that out.
No, you're going to leave it in because it's true.
Don't you talk that way, Roger. We know why we're here.
I wish you would.
I'm just here for the money.
I'm still trying to figure it out.
Oh, man. Oh, Roger, it is amazing. And if people knew, if they understood I'm sure you're about to try to tell them, that right after our last podcast about 3 weeks ago, you called me and you said, you're not going to believe what's happening. And all of these things that you've been going through the big circle of state government down at Austin, at the Capitol, that you've been going round and round and round with. And we've been talking about that on the podcast. But all of these things rarely begin to bear fruit. You just do what you do because it's the best thing that you know to do. But then every once in a while, you break through the ice and you lift your head up into the sunshine. And there are people listening to you that have not listened to you before. And I'm not talking about the podcast. I'm talking about the real Roger down there in Austin. And you've been on telephone meetings and things have taken place. And you were obviously excited about some of the responses you were getting, although you are always carefully guarded because you're nobody's fool. You have been up these roads so many times, but you really got further up the trail here lately than you've seen in a while. I'll quit being vague, Roger, and why don't you talk about what's been going on?
All right. Well, I had a meeting scheduled, which we discussed on the last podcast, which in fact did in fact take place. And I met with four or five. I'm not sure. There was four on the screen. There might have been a fifth person that was not on the screen. But a committee of 5 people who are involved with the policy side of the class program, the program that I'm connected up with. And it is the policy people who obviously make the policies. That's why they're called policy people. But I've never been able to talk to anyone, so up until now, that was actually connected directly with the policy side of this program. There are things that need to be altered, changed, and so forth about the class program. None of the things we discussed in this particular meeting I had have to do with money. This is strictly policy changes, things that need to be addressed. Much of what we've talked about on this show before, or podcast before. For example, quick example, the idea that family is going to be there to take care of everything, and what do you do when there's no family, which is my situation? That's a policy issue. And so we met for about 30 minutes, and I did 99% of the talking, and they listened, which was good in the sense that I wanted to get all these points made. So we centered primarily in on the family issues and discussed that. I discussed it with them. And at the end of the meeting, toward the end of the meeting, they assured me that the points I had made were valid. Number one, they were valid points. Number two, they were points that apparently they had never thought of before, never been brought up. And that's significant because quite often you get in these meetings and you start to express ideas and they look at you like, well, we've seen this movie before. We've already run this rabbit. We know the answer. We already, and at that point they pat you on the head and send you down the hall. But this was not the case with this particular meeting. They seemed genuinely interested in what I was saying. They seemed genuinely concerned in the sense that they were taking notes, and I could see that because being on the podcast, I could see what they were doing. And they weren't just nodding off to sleep. They were actually paying attention. And their response to me was, first of all, they thought I had made very good points. And secondly, that most of the points I made were systemic in nature. That's not a word you really want to hear, but it is true. And that means that the problem is one that's within the system itself and cannot be easily fixed by simply making a small change in wording of a policy.
Yeah, it's like turning the Queen Mary.
It's a very, and the idea being that it's going to take time for them to talk to people and get back with me and let me know what we can do or not do. Hopefully, one or more of these people will get me connected with yet another committee. that I can make similar comments to, and hopefully I'm moving up the ladder, if you will, of bureaucracy. I would put these nice people probably in the mid-management level. They're the highest I've ever talked to, but they answer to bosses above them that probably answer to bosses above them. But
Roger,
nonetheless,
let me throw something in here.
Okay.
I feel like that I'm the guy that always is watching out the podcast window while you're talking a lot of times. I think we assume very easily and very quickly sometimes that everyone listening to this podcast has listened to all the prior podcasts, and that is simply not the case. And so I just want to take just a moment and say, for those of you who may be just tuning in, what Roger is talking about is one of the many frustrating issues that as a fully disabled person he is dealing with, and they are deep situations. Roger does not get out of bed. Roger cannot go to the restroom. Roger cannot fix anything to eat or get a simple drink of water unless that is prepared and given to him. It takes a caregiver, and over a period of a lineup of 24/7 caregivers personally interspersed into Roger's day and into Roger's night for him to be able to go to bed or for him to be able to get out of bed and so many other things. And no longer does the system where the government stands up and beats its chest and says, look how we take care of the disabled in the great state of Texas and anywhere else in the country for that matter. We provide this and we provide that. But the truth of the matter is they don't provide it because over the decades, our world, our economic culture has changed to the point to where it is no longer adequate to get people like Roger what they need. And all we are suggesting is that the system need to be tweaked. And when we started this quest, it wasn't about getting more money as much as it was about changing the way, the tight-fisted controls over what does Roger do? What does Roger do when there's a snowstorm? What does Roger do when he's actually sick for one reason or another? What does Roger do with any one of his caretakers who simply can't show up for whatever reason on what's going on in their personal life? What does Roger do? Because the situation can become eminently serious in an hour or two. Roger needs a certain amount of attention, and the state has said we are providing this, but the truth is they're not. They are far from adequate at this point. And so Roger has these issues, and that's what we're talking about here, because it has been a round robin of people for years that Roger has simply tried to talk to shine a light on some of this and say, hey, we need to revisit this. We need to work this stuff out again. So, and you know, it's like Roger has told me many times off mic. I'm not supposed to mention stuff he tells me off mic, but he tells me, he said, you know, so often he'll get in a Zoom meeting or a telephone meeting, and it becomes quickly evident that he's the only one that knows what he's talking about because he's living it. He's not a paid politician. He lives this life from day to day. So, excuse me, Roger, I just wanted to bring everyone up to the same page.
Right. And let me clarify a point I brushed over in my initial statement that probably would be helpful for any new listeners. The state of Texas has a policy that's called, and I don't know if they officially titled this, but the idea is family first. And that means, and wisely so, that means that your family is responsible for the upkeep of the individual, okay? And so they are not going to provide a lot of extra hours and a lot of extra help when the system says your family will be there and they will take care of you.
Yeah, but there's just one problem with that.
Yeah, there's a major problem in my case. And that problem is I have no family living within driving distance of where I'm at now. So I am one of probably a very few on this program that's as old as I am. Therefore, other people, other clients are not plagued quite as strongly as I am because they do have the family to take care of them. I do not, and I'm encouraging the state of Texas to be aware of the fact that as this program moves along, more and more people will become like me in that they will get older and their families may predecease them, and they will be left in the similar situation I'm in.
Yeah, we hate this, but we have to address it.
Exactly. And what I'm wanting the state to do is look at it now to get things lined up for a future of boomers that are going to come along and be in much the same situation I'm in. A lot of disabled people are not fortunate as I am in that they don't have genuinely good health. And so quite often they die at a fairly young age, if you will. I was blessed with good health, a good immune system, and therefore I have managed to live through all kinds of illnesses without catching them, first of all, and i.e. COVID-19, I did not get, didn't want, and never had. But as a result, I have outlived my family, and I'm outliving my age caregivers and people, friends of mine, because we're all getting to an age now where they can't come in and help. But the point is that I don't have the family the state assumes you have, because they built this program for young people. And they didn't build it with me in mind, but I'm going to be duplicated many times over in the not too distant future in the state of Texas.
Well, and let's point out too, Roger, that you are you're suffering from the effects of cerebral palsy from the day that you were born.
Right.
Again, I feel like sometimes you need to remind your listeners of that, because the truth is, by far, the lion's share of cerebral palsy victims, and it's okay to use the word victim, I think, here, that are suffering from the ravages of cerebral palsy, those people generally, as a rule, don't really have the ability to communicate and talk clearly. They are as smart as anybody else you'll run into. It's all in there, but they cannot, don't seem to be able to talk clearly at all. And so all of this stuff that you've got, all of this information that's in you, that you've lived a lifetime dealing with this system and learning how to overcome. And man, people look at your bio and see all the things you've done. All of this is by and large because you can open up your mind and communicate. And that's why, Roger, you're so doggone valuable to the system. Those people in Austin need to listen, because you speak for this whole segment of the community, this whole piece of pie that can't speak for themselves.
That is precisely what I hope to accomplish in the next few weeks, months, and much as years. Now, this is why we're trying to get on the various committees. I'm not working now. I'm not in school anymore. I've got the time to spend on meeting with people Zoom-wise in Austin or Washington, D.C. or wherever. And I would like to spend some of my time doing that because I believe I can share points of view that are never expressed because even though most of the consumer representatives that serve on boards throughout Texas and the United States for disabled people are the parents, friends, brothers, sisters, grandparents of the client as opposed to the client. Because
so they have some understanding.
They have some, but not the same as being there.
Yeah.
And they can only respond to their own situation because they've never had the opportunity to look at it from other viewpoints. Since I've been at this for decades now, I have seen a lot of different viewpoints and can try to get an idea across in such a way that it will not conflict with the current thinking of government and of the system itself. I always want to speak well of the system. Yes, it's flawed. It's not perfect, but it is an attempt on the part of government to help us. And I want to always be thankful for the attempt, but I would like to be given the possibility of changing and making it better.
Thank you, Roger Dykes, for not staying in your box, because, as you know, disabled people are so often just put in their box and expected to more or less stay there. You're not very good at that.
No, I've been outside the box most of my life, and one of the reasons I've been outside the box is exactly what you mentioned earlier, and that is my ability to speak, because that put me outside the typical cerebral palsy box. For our listeners that may not know, let me explain quickly. I won't get into. I don't know any heavy medical terms, so don't worry. I'm going to use them, but cerebral palsy is brain damage. And in my case, it happened at birth. It can happen in a car wreck. It can happen in a swimming accident. There are many ways that the brain can be damaged. But in my case, it was at birth. Now, I say that because we are not like cerebral palsy people, are not like, for example, muscular dystrophy. Muscular dystrophy has devastating effects on the individual, but the major issue there is that eventually your lungs, the muscles around your lungs, deteriorate to the point you can't breathe, and it is muscular dystrophy is terminal. Okay, cerebral palsy is not terminal. The brain may be damaged, and we may not be able to talk. We may not be able to do a lot of things, but there's nothing physically wrong with me and with many other cerebral palsy people that's going to make us terminal because of cerebral palsy.
Yeah.
So it does change your perspective when you realize that you're not going to die within the next 10 to 15 or 20 years, depending on how old you are at that point, because of the disability.
Now, Roger, I don't want to make light of your situation ever. But I'm going to go ahead and reveal on this podcast something that I have not revealed until today. Do you know that I have a certain kind of brain damage myself? Did you know about that? I don't think I've ever mentioned that to you. I was fed some what they called Tex-Mex north of the Red River in Oklahoma one time.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and it really messed me up. I'm just saying, if you people want to avoid, you Texans want to avoid, a certain kind of brain damage, don't eat Mexican food in Oklahoma. Yeah, I'm just saying. I just thought I would point that out. I thought this was a good moment to interject that in the conversation here.
Do you realize the further north you go and eat Mexican food, the more challenging it becomes not to become brain damaged?
I told my wife, I said, if you ordered Mexican food at Disneyland, this is what it would taste like.
Right.
I don't know if anybody gets that, but it made perfect sense to me.
Well, remember now, Pace Picante sauce began its campaign with, it wasn't made in New York City.
Oh, yeah. Get a rope.
There you go.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, Roger, I really have probably more fun with you sometimes than I should. I love you, little brother, and I appreciate so much that you share with us like you do. Roger Dykes Just Sayin, of course, is the name of this podcast. And we want to, one more time, Roger, let's say thank you, a really heartfelt thank you from the people on this podcast to our listeners who a couple of episodes back really heeded the call when we said, hey, man, we need, if you would please, folks, would you make some calls to your, the appropriate representatives from wherever you are and tell them about this movement, which I think it's okay to call it that. People like Roger have serious concerns, and you need to pay attention to this. And suddenly, you can argue whether or not it was connected, but suddenly doors began to fly open. And Roger has had a number of really positive meetings with people, and you've got some more lined up, right?
Yes, I've got one lined up this week with another group, another part of this problem in Austin, and this time it will be dealing with the money side of how the funding for this program needs to be increased. As much as I hate to say that, because I'm not a person who believes in solving problems by throwing money at it, but there does have to be a point where it has to be discussed that the money is just not sufficient to get the job done that they're trying to get done for the amount of money they're willing to pay.
Yeah, in the last 20 or 30 years, can anyone really find a leg to stand on to argue the fact that things don't cost any more than they used to? Please, for crying out loud. And you can ride that horse until there's just what you're doing is totally inadequate. Oh, well, maybe we should listen to Roger. Gee whiz, man. There is a level of frustration there.
Well, and you also understand, because you know me well, that I don't have a leg to stand on either.
Oh, man. So you got big meetings coming up next week.
Yes, I do have that. I do have hopefully a major meeting coming up. Now, they quickly told me that nothing will be solved within this particular meeting. It will be just almost like a reconnaissance flight that I'll go in and give them ideas, and they'll consider there's money available. The Texas State Legislature has already allotted all the money to the different programs. We didn't get any benefit. My program did not get any benefit from that this time around. But the man I was talking to assured me that there are other funding sources that they're looking at. And the best scenario that I can see at the moment is that they are considering and trying to partner up with the federal government to get some federal dollars for some of these programs, which would definitely increase the revenue stream for the program.
Well, Roger, we're talking about money here all of a sudden, but the real truth is that there needs to be a change in how whatever funds are available are distributed so that you have, like any other normal living and breathing person, you have the ability to adjust and make changes because of the circumstances of what's happening around you.
Right. And that will be extremely helpful But in all reality, the money has just got to come up.
Well, and it's complicated. And I have been giving strict instructions not to talk about this and not to talk about that because it is complicated. And there are a lot of people who may or may not be listening who it directly affects. But I will tell you this. I will testify to our listeners on this podcast that Roger literally lays awake at night figuring out how he can best take care of the people who take care of him. And the cards that he is being dealt at this game are no longer adequate to keep him in the game. And we'll just leave it at that for now.
Well, we're hoping to get some things. It won't, like I said, it won't change immediately by any stretch. But if we can just get a few more, I feel like Clint Eastwood, what I need is a few dollars more, and I can make things work a whole lot better because the fistful of dollars I've got now is pretty small.
And there you are with your Cowboy Picture Show references again.
There we go.
I just love that about you.
Well, there's always a good cowboy or a cop reference that will work on any situation.
Did you have any special words of wisdom? Roger, we are, I'm looking at the podcast clock here. We have nothing but the best.
By the way, Michael, I need to get one of those.
Yeah. That's what you have me for, Roger.
Oh, okay.
I wouldn't even be here if I didn't have a podcast clock.
Okay. I'm clear on that.
Do you have any words of wisdom for our listeners before we turn off the lights here?
Well, I will say that I appreciate very much all of our listeners. Hopefully we're gaining as time goes on. And
we are. Analytics show that. Yes.
We will get more, and we will get people who are even more connected to these issues that can hear and maybe make adjustments or get people ready for adjustments that need to be made. So I am thankful ever so much for every podcast listener we have. And I thank you for listening, and I thank you for your involvement in some of these issues.
And I'll say, folks, that's sincere. We really do appreciate you. Roger Dykes, same time, same bat station. What, about 3 weeks from now?
You made a bat station reference. That's not a Western or a cop show, but I got it.
I knew you would get that. Yeah.
I did. Yes.
Bless you, little brother. See you next time.
All right. Thanks a lot.
You've been listening to Roger Dykes Just Sayin. If you'd like to get a message to Roger, his Facebook account is listed as Roger Dykes. Become a friend, or you can send your questions and comments to rogerdykes51@gmail.com. That's ROGERDYKES51@gmail.com. Our podcast reveals a new episode every 3 weeks. Rollout is on Wednesday evening, shortly after dark, Texas time. Join us next time for our next episode of Roger Dykes Just Sayin. I'm Michael Shawn. On behalf of Roger Dykes, thanks for listening.